Well, breaking news, according to the New York Times. The origins of COVID-19 began in the Hunan market of Wuhan, China, not in a lab located in the same city. This is according to twin preprint studies reported by the New York Times on Saturday. The report states, analyzing a wide range of data, including virus genes, maps of market stalls, and the social media activity of early COVID-19 patients across Wuhan, the scientists concluded that the coronavirus was very likely present in live mammals sold at the Hunan seafood wholesale market in late 2019 and suggested that the virus spilled over into people working or shopping there on two separate occasions.
The studies provide further ammunition for the wet market theory, but despite the Times report citing, quote, a wide range of data, some scientists point out some red flags, particularly due to the fact that the studies are preprint, not yet peer-reviewed, and have some gaps in the data.
Scientific advisor at the Broad Institute of MIT and Harvard and co-author of Viral, The Search for the Origin of COVID-19, Alina Chan, who will be joining us later this week to discuss this more in depth, pointed out some of these sentiments online. So Chan tweeted, the coverage of the newest preprints by the proximal origin authors and friends must be breaking some kind of record. Has anyone else heard of preprints being featured on New York Times front page news, not to mention at the same time as a war is starting? She goes on to note, I'm not sure how much time Carl Zimmer had to review these preprints before they went public. One question I think should be put to the authors is if they can represent the sampling data more accurately by showing the number of samples taken per stall. So Chan also points out some issues in the New York Times reporting of the preprint. She says, quote, I also think New York Times, Carl Zimmer, Ben J. Miller, that your reporting should raise the possible conflicts of interest among the authorship. The study was conceived by Christian Anderson of Proximal Origin, February 1st, call fame, and the project was funded by whole or in part by NYT.
Chan isn't the only one raising concerns. Investigative journalist Allison Young tweeted, I have read this news article 3 times now, and it is still not clear to me why these preprints, while interesting, merited a news alert from the New York Times for a story that couches the findings with phrases like very likely and might have. So basically, it sounds like they still don't know. I mean, they're like, oh, no, it came from a lab because look at, we've got, we sampled all this data and we tracked it all around. And so it very likely and might have come from this, and it's breaking, and here's an alert. Now
right,
you know.
And this Times article is a classic case of what they often do. Like, send an alert, the headline is very clear. If that's all you read, you'd be like, oh, okay, there's a
case
giant
closed.
paper, case
and
closed,
there
to
it
figure
is.
this out.
Yeah.
You can look at what Chan says on Twitter, and we'll talk to her later, or you can read further down in the article itself. And the New York Times, if you flip it upside down, often it gives you the truth, gives you the closest thing to accurate that they can, but they bury it down at the bottom. So often, I'll read the first couple paragraphs, and then I jump all the way to the end of the story. The last 7 paragraphs are really where you're going to find the most accurate reporting. And in this story, it's no exception. They quote a ton of scientists who also read the report and are like, yeah, I don't know where they're getting their confidence. Like, it's a plausible theory, so it's not implausible, but they haven't marshaled evidence that it's necessarily the case, because, as they say, there easily could have been somebody who walked into the wet market with COVID,
right,
and then it spread throughout the wet market. Nothing that they found.
That's the key.
Undermines that plausible theory, and that's still
right.
A
There's no new
theory.
evidence. Right. That was the case before. That's still the case. Still the case that it could have just been a very early super spreader event, or it could have been the origin. But we don't. And people have varying opinions on what is more likely, and we don't really know. But it looks like they just kind of analyzed that same theory and said
they found a lot of COVID positive samples right around where the live animals were. So that's okay, that's interesting. That's new evidence. Okay, fine, we'll take that. We'll take that into consideration, but it's by no means conclusive.
And haven't they still not found the transfer animal or whatever?
Right, the raccoon dog, whatever that is, was the one that was that were around this area where they had the samples. But you're right, they haven't definitively found this is the animal.
Which I thought they've said is weird that they haven't found it yet.
Usually you should be
I thought it came from the bat, right? I thought we were all
that
saying
was the
it came
first
from the
weekend, yeah.
Right.
But now they haven't been able to prove that yet.
Pangolin, remember the pangolin?
Right. That was
I mean,
just playing on cliches about Chinese people to say it was bat soup. Like that
right.
was just
Well, and
basically
there's
racism.
other issues with this study, and that is that there have been tissue samples, blood samples that were taken as early as September and even earlier in places like Italy, where they discovered COVID prior to it even being.
And that's never been sufficiently explained or explored.
Yes, yeah, right. They found from before the wet market.
Yeah, so when you've got these other inconsistencies, on top of it, you do have those military games that happened in 2019 in October. A lot of military people reported being sick after going and being there. So it's like it could have come in through one of them. And, when you got a lot of international people traveling in, whether you want to think that there's some sort of conspiracy or something that happened regarding that event. I know a lot of people think, well, maybe a military brought it in using those military games. Either way, whether it was something like that or it was just a bunch of people who came in traveling from foreign areas, getting together in one, spreading a virus around. There's just so many other loose ends to this that don't really add up to, we could just point to for sure it happened at that market. And it very well, like you mentioned, it could have been where it started off with a person and then maybe it did transfer to an animal. We know that has been happening. It happened in Denmark when it went from the humans to the minks to the back to the humans. So we're seeing these transfers happening. So who knows? I mean, we basically still don't know. But it deserved the alert apparently and breaking news. And now a lot of people think, well, that's it. They've concluded.
All three of it. We're all still skeptical. All three of your hosts just as skeptical. So meanwhile, Fox News reported last week that sources told the British newspaper The Telegraph that the official view within the UK's leadership is that the virus did escape from a lab in Wuhan, China, though government officials are more open about that in private than in public.
This follows news that a group of scientists published a study, Frontiers in Virology, that said they identified a tiny snippet of code that is identical to part of a gene patented by Moderna 3 years before the pandemic. It was discovered in SARS-CoV-2's unique furin cleavage site, the part that makes it so good at infecting people and separates it from other coronaviruses. The researchers suggest the virus may have mutated to have a furin cleavage site during experiments on human cells in a lab. They claim there's a 1 in 3 trillion chance Moderna's sequence randomly appeared through natural evolution. Now, take this information with a grain of salt. We're still sorting this through, but that furin cleavage site has been the central focus of researchers. Chan references this February 1st conference call. That's the one where Fauci and other scientists got together to discuss this very curious furin cleavage site. And so many of the scientists on the call said this doesn't appear like it could have come from a natural evolutionary process. It does appear like this came from a lab. And then it's several days later when Fauci said this is a conspiracy theory. Let's not go forward with this. But so that is the part that first got those scientists saying, this looks off.
Well, and one thing I'm kind of learning is that there's whenever somebody's pointing the finger at somebody else, a lot of times they might need to be pointing the finger back at themselves. And, we don't see China going around really pointing at us and saying, no, they did. They definitely have alluded to it. So has Iran. But they're not really ferociously coming at us saying, no, it came from you. It came from your lab. It's interesting that the government officials unofficially believe that it did come from a lab in China. They're pointing the finger there. That doesn't surprise me at all. They want to blame something on China in order to be able to go after them. And they like to layer on as much as they possibly can, this being one of them. But it is interesting then if they're ferociously going after China, constantly pointing the finger at them, saying, no, it came from your lab. It was you. And then suddenly we find out, well, we got this little thing from 3 years earlier, and it maybe came from Moderna, which is the more government funded of the, Moderna is the one that's most ingrained with our government as being the closest to being a government vaccine than any of the others. I don't know. It's interesting, right?
And at minimum, it could suggest that some researchers, had been working on furin cleavage sites that are similar to this, which would then just be more evidence that raises the likelihood that that's how that got inserted in there. But for the Chinese government, they've been extremely opaque. There's so much information that they still have that they could release. And the Times article, to its credit, talks about that towards the very end, that if they would release these samples and these other, the other bits of evidence, could add to the picture, which just creates more suspicion around what happened.
Yeah, they don't want to help because maybe they did it. They don't want to give any reason for that theory to gain more credibility, even though I do think that's what happened, but we don't know for sure.
Look, at this point, I think we can't make any conclusions whatsoever about anything. I mean, I've said it before and I'll say it again. Everybody, including the bat, is still a suspect in this. We don't really have any firm evidence. I mean, we're getting clues, and I definitely think we should continue to investigate, because if it did come from a lab, whether it be in China or Moderna's lab or wherever, or a military lab in North Carolina or something, we need to investigate this so that we can make sure it doesn't happen again, because this was a giant we don't even need to categorize how terrible this whole thing was.
Let's actually just stop funding and doing that research. Regardless, even if it did not come from a lab, that research sounds like a bad idea. Please stop doing it. Yeah. Please.
And if it did come from the lab, they only started doing it in like 2014 and blew up the world just 5 years later.
5 years later, yeah.
So,
great.
And if it didn't, let's still not do that.
Still not do it. Let's not and say we did. Tomorrow on Rising, we have another great show for you. Team Rising is in the House. We'll preview President Biden's State of the Union address and weigh in on the latest developments, of course, with Russia and Ukraine.
Be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss a video.
And catch us now on TikTok at Rising the Hill.
Ryan never leaves TikTok, so you'll see him
Maybe
all the time.
I'll make an account so I can follow Rising.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.